I didn't realize that we had actually served the women Red Bull at the retreat so they could grow wings. It just shows how commercials have a way of kind of hitting us, don't they? I mean, when she said, and we started a group with wings, I thought, wow, okay. I thought of Red Bull, how stupid is that? I mean, anyway, what day, let's see, is there a game today? Some important for some people? I read a story recently, kind of ties in, maybe not really, but it does kind of. Mike Ditka, many of you remember from way back when with the Bears, and they were Super Bowl champs and everything, and they had William the Refrigerator Perry was the big tackle that everybody talked about, and then Jim McMahon was a wild man at quarterback who led kind of an interesting lifestyle. Well, the chaplain for that team was there one day, and Mike Ditka was going to give him a pep talk, and he talked to the group and he said, okay, William Perry, when I'm done, I want you to lead the team in the Lord's Prayer. William Perry, who's African American, just about turned white. You can tell he was really nervous and he started sweating. And Mike Ditka went into his talk, and all of a sudden his chaplain gets a tap on his shoulder from Jim McMahon and says, look over there, William Perry doesn't know the Lord's Prayer. And the chaplain, oh, everybody knows the Lord's Prayer. No, he said, I don't think he knows the Lord's Prayer. I'll bet you $50 he doesn't know it. The chaplain said it felt a little odd sitting in the Lord's house betting $50 on whether somebody knew the Lord's Prayer. But then he said, okay. And Mike Ditka finally finished and nodded at William Perry. And the poor guy was sweating so bad, and he had his hands on his face and put him down and finally said, now I lay me down to sleep. Pray the Lord. He got halfway through the prayer and a tap went on the chaplain's shoulder, and Jim McMahon said, here's your $50. I really didn't think he knew the Lord's Prayer. One of the things when we talk about being the salt of the earth is there's some zip, isn't there? There's some flavor, some stuff to it that makes it desirable, and it's something that we all kind of look forward to. My poor boys, I have 4 boys, and I just about starved them to death when I were younger because I did a lot of the cooking and soup. Somehow I just didn't know how to make. It was not good. My wife didn't enjoy it, my boys didn't enjoy it, I didn't enjoy it, but I didn't know what I was doing wrong. I finally went to our cook who's makes some really good soups, and I said, what's your secret? I said, I've got vegetables, I've got lamb, I've got chicken, I've got all the things that you would want for a good soup, but it doesn't taste very good. And she just giggled a little bit and said, 2 things, a lot of onion and salt. And lo and behold, I think I do a pretty good job these days. I've learned how to put salt in and a lot more onion, but that salt made the difference for making it from a very bland to a tasty soup. At least they haven't said anything lately that would say otherwise. You are the salt of the earth. You make a difference. You add zip to life. When we talk about what's going on in our world today, some of the pictures we have of who Jesus is are pretty messed up. In fact, one of the first things I talk about in camp is we are back into faith introduction, helping kids to see who Jesus is. Bishop Mark Hansen, used to be bishop of the LCA, was wearing his collar, got on a plane one day, and a guy sat next to him and looked at him and said, you're a pastor, aren't you? I said, yeah. And he introduced himself. He said, well, I don't believe that Jesus stuff. He said, really? He said, why don't we sit and talk a little bit? You tell me about this Jesus you believe in, because I may not, or don't believe in, and I may not believe in him either. Because you see, he understood that the pictures out there about who Jesus is very messed up. Jesus comes off as being judgmental sometimes. Jesus comes off as being not having any power to make a difference in people's lives. Jesus has just a whole lot of pictures. In fact, if we went through our pictures here in this worship this morning, there'd be some differences. I got involved with FCA way back in the dark ages, and I thought Jesus was 6'3", 220 pounds, and a little linebacker for the Jerusalem Jets, the way they talk, because everything wrapped around athletics, and we kind of make Jesus in our own image sometimes. And we need to understand this Jesus of the Scriptures needs to come to us and meet us as the one who is Lord of all, Savior of all, but who is kind, gentle, grace-filled, powerful. The seas obeyed him. Diseases fled from people's bodies because of him. Demons shook in fear. The world was transformed. I went to one church a while back. They had 12 people. And it was really awkward because about up to that first pillars back there, I got in front, and you know where all 12 of them sat? The very back row. Both pews in the back were filled. So I went back there and did the liturgy and everything else. I got about halfway through the sermon, I looked at him and I said, I don't know if you think this is worth hearing, but you still have mission. You need to keep thinking about who you are and what you're going to do in this world, and not think about dying as a church. I said, how many disciples did Jesus have? 12. Huh. We counted off. 12 of you. How much difference did those 12 disciples make in our world? They changed the world. You and I wouldn't be here without those 12 disciples. Think of generations to come. How many of you are here today? There's more than 12 at this worship. And you might say, oh man, I wish this church were full. But the reality is, it doesn't make any difference how many people are here. It's how much you have as far as mission and being the salt of the earth. Introducing people to the Jesus of the Scriptures. Introducing people so that they can see and have their life filled with zest and flavor. Bursting so that people want to hear and partake. You're going to have communion. The body of Christ given for you. The blood of Christ shed for you. That goes out into the world. That's why he's giving it to you. Well, salt of the earth. The next thing he said was, what? You're the light of the world. Now, the question is, if it's dark out there, where's the problem? Is it out there? Or is it in here? You who are the light, shine forth. If you hide it in this sanctuary, that's not the light that the world needs. It's still dark out there. And I have to admit, with this last election, it got pretty dark, didn't it? What I hear from most people, they didn't like either one, all 28 of the candidates who, when they started, there got to be, there were favorites and less favorites and everything, but it's been kind of a dark thing. The division, the struggle, the hurts, all the things that are going on. How do we be the light? How does the church make a difference in the world? So where that darkness is, we can bring light. I grew up I always say I grew up, my wife would remind me, Lord, you never grew up. I got older and I grew up, okay? And kitchen was remodeled. It had all windows. Problem was they all faced the east. What's the problem with windows in the east if you're trying to sleep? The sun rises early in the morning and shines in your face. I hated that. So I learned to pull the shades. And it worked pretty good. I got comfortable in there. I didn't have any light around, and I didn't have to get up until Dad had called me the third time to go out and do chores. We can do that in the church. We can pull the shades. We can make it so that people won't see the light. Sometimes it's just we want to be comfortable. Sometimes it's just because it's a lot less work. Sometimes it's a fear of what's out there. It can be all sorts of reasons. It can be racism. The guy who wrote Amazing Grace, he wrote the song. But even a year after he was converted, he was still hauling slaves back and forth. It took a while for that grace to grab hold and to change him. But then, out came that beautiful song, Amazing Grace. I know a lot of things, we confess our sins today, and they're real, aren't they? We know sin. But God doesn't want us just to keep mired in those. He forgives those sins so we can change. And we can help our world change. There's two things I think that are kind of fun for me. I shouldn't say fun, because they hit home, too close to home. Dr. Martin Luther King wrote in his famous letter from Birmingham jail, I must make two honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the past years I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's greatest stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizens counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice. They who constantly say, I agree with you in the goal you seek, I cannot agree with your methods or of direct action. Who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another person's freedom. Who lives by a mythical concept of time, who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is more bewildering than outward rejection. I find that interesting. I'm a white moderate. Grew up that way, got older that way. I watched the civil rights movement of the 60s in college. I watched the Vietnam protest in college. But I didn't get involved in anything. For or against that, I desire that I wish that I had thought through and been more aware of what was going on in our world, to at least have had some passion enough to do something other than watch. I'd rather be wrong, moving, than right, sitting off to the side and doing nothing. The gospel calls us to be involved. And it makes a difference when the church gets their act together, gets out of that comfortable bed, and moves out into the sunshine, and lets the light move with them out into the world. You are the light of the world. There are people living in darkness. Will we bring light, or will we conceal it? I went to Africa back in 1971. I might have shared this 2 years ago, but it was transformative for me. I prayed for Africa for 5 years. Had a friend from South Africa, as he prayed for his people, had tears in his eyes. He was a youth director, a teacher, and a worker in the fields. What he earned from the fields, he gave to his family. What he got from his teacher's salary went to the kids so they could get pencils and paper so they could go to school. And then he worked as a volunteer at 16 churches as a youth director. He came to this country and was afraid to talk about anything about apartheid because he was afraid it would go back to his home. One night as we were praying, I looked back and there was this 46-year-old man with tears running down his face. And then he looked at me and said, why don't you come and help me someday in youth ministry? So we started praying about it for 5 years, and we finally got there, and I got to meet him in South Africa. But I was going to bring the gospel to Africa. I was so excited to have Jesus come with us. We were going to change that whole continent. And after all, they called it the dark continent once upon a time. So I was going to bring light. Second day in Ethiopia, I flew up to Asmara, got on a bus, got kicked off the bus because I didn't have a military pass to go through, and had to hitchhike back into town of 200,000, get a pass. Everybody I knew had gone. They had moved back into, I had nobody to turn to, so I sat down in the office to get this pass, which sometimes takes up to a month. I would have been a very hungry man by the end of that month, I tell you. But somehow, the guy looked at me, we got it taken care of. I got the brand new Volkswagen from Massawa, Ethiopia, and brought it back to Asmara the next day. And I was going to go back to Addis, and it's a 2-day trip. They told me don't give to beggars because you'll end up with a whole bunch of people around you. I didn't know the language, so I didn't know exactly what was going to happen. But I was by myself, 700 miles from anybody I knew. Delivered the envelope I was going to mail, turned around, and there was a little girl, maybe 6, 7 years old, leading her blind father. She was just a cute gal. I still can close my eyes and still see her 40-some years later. She had on 2 or 3 dresses because they were torn and tattered, and one covered what the other didn't cover. Her dad was dressed the same way with tattered clothes. Stuck out her little hand, asking for some money. Oh, that moment was awful. I was told, don't give to beggars. What do? I turned around and walked away. I got to across the street, got into the Volkswagen camper, and looked back across the street, and there she was, still looking at me with her hand out. I said, I don't know if I have enough money to get back. I don't know. All those things came to mind. But I turned the key and drove off. You know what I figured out a little while later? This great saint named Lord Stephen Tate that was going to bring the light to Africa, on the second day had met Jesus and didn't recognize him. I drove off. One of the things, if we're to be the light of Christ, is to look at everybody we meet and look to see Jesus in that person. They don't have to be Christian. They don't have to be white. They don't have to be black. They don't have to be Asian. Just every person we meet. Do you see Jesus in them? Then let that person teach you about who Jesus is. The church for too long has been willing to be very comfortable. But if we're to be light and salt, it's to get out, get moving. What a message we have to share, right? Think about it. Hope, light, taste, see the Lord is good. All those things come to mind if we start talking about going out instead of, well, do I have enough money? Should I do that? Well, I don't know if that person will like me. I don't know. We can go all day long with I don't knows. The one thing we do know is God says, don't put the bushel over. Get out and move. And it's a little bit of a state of mind. I mean, we've got to have that sense that God's going to make a difference. How many of you saw the movie Unbroken? 1, 2, 3. How many of you read the book? The book is so much better because it deals with the whole man's life. And you go through this book of a runner and growing up, and then he gets captured or gets shot down over the Pacific. He's on a lifeboat with 4 other guys. 1 dies, and 2 of them make it anyway, I think it is. And then it goes through prison camp. And it is hard to read all that. It's hard to imagine what that person went through. And then he comes back finally. He does make it through. But he has these nightmares of this guard who beat him almost every night. And he starts drinking as the only way he could deal with it. His wife goes to, Billy Graham was just starting his missions. And I know I have a hard time, there's been a while that I have to admit I've got caught in the whole thing of, us Lutherans are right just about all the time. But this guy, his wife went and said, you gotta come. He said, no way. He finally did come and walked out. The second time he went and he wanted to walk out, but he went forward. He walked home and emptied every beer bottle. He said, alcohol. He said, I never had wanted to drink again. He burned all the cigarettes, whatever. And it's not that those things are the evil thing, but for him, they were the wall that was keeping him from health. And the gospel grabbed him so much that it turned his whole life around. And he lived till he was 90-some years old, living and breathing Jesus, being the light and salt. It makes a difference. So it has a lot to do with it. A 92-year-old lady, I'll just read this short. I hope I don't keep you past the Super Bowl. I mean, the commercials you can read. The 92-year-old, petite, well-poised, and proud lady who is fully dressed each morning by 8 o'clock with her hair fashionably coiffed and makeup perfectly applied, even though she is legally blind. She moved into a nursing home today. Her husband of 70 years recently passed away, making the move necessary. After many hours of waiting patiently in the lobby of the nursing home, she smiled sweetly when told her room was ready. As she maneuvered her walker to the elevator, I provided a visual description of her tiny room, including the eyelet sheets that had been hung on her window. "I love it," she stated with the enthusiasm of an 8-year-old having just been presented with a new puppy. "Mrs. Jones, you haven't even seen the room yet." "Just wait." "Oh, that doesn't make any difference. That doesn't have anything to do with it," she replied. "Happiness is something you decide ahead of time. Whether I like my room or not doesn't depend on how the furniture is arranged. It's how I arrange my mind. I already decided to love it. It's a decision I make every morning when I wake up. I have a choice. I can spend the day in bed recounting the difficulty I have with the parts of my body that don't work anymore. Or get out of bed and be thankful for the ones that do. Each day is a gift, and as long as my eyes open, I'll focus on the new day, all the happy memories I've stored away, just for this time in my life." Now we in the church can look at each other and say, "Look, those guys on that side, you know what, they really messed up." Or you look at all the things that we do wrong that don't work in church, we all can name them, can't we? In fact, some of you are going to go home, maybe, and they used to say, "Oh, that Lauren Tate boy, I wish it could have been 10 minutes shorter, could have been whatever." But you can tell all the things that I did wrong, but you can also tell all the things that's wrong with Maple Grove Lutheran. And there are things. Or if you want to get even big picture, you can go about the church worldwide and you can talk all the things that are wrong with the church. You hear what she said? I don't get up thinking about all the things that don't work. Have you thought about all the things that do work here at Maple Grove? You think of the kindnesses and the places that you guys touch in the community and with each other here, but that spreads out, that makes a difference for other people to see Christ in you. The light, the salt. This church has a story. You've got hundreds and thousands of stories to tell of how Jesus has moved and changed you and others here. That's what it means to be the salt and light. It's rearranging our thinking pattern to start saying, what do we share? What is it that we've got to share? And it's not just about us, but man, then you start thinking about who God is and Jesus. And I get to share his story that changes all of us. Well, yeah, I'll close. When you get my age, you get forgetful, so you kind of go over a few things sometimes. We had a pastor in Ellsworth, Iowa. Good man. He was pastor there for 47 years. But my friends used to go nuts at his services because he'd get halfway through the sermon and he forgot where he was at. So he'd start from the beginning again. And his sermons always lasted 45 minutes to an hour without those interruptions. So when he did that, it'd sometimes go an hour and a half. So be thankful I'm not there yet. Probably one last one that I'd like you to think about that's important for us as a church. We can get caught up in the fears that are out there and what's going on and stuff like that. You can say, I don't have this ability, I don't have that ability, whatever else. But this was a brief one from Harriet Tubman, who guided 300 slaves from the south to the north, from the slave states to the free states. And on that path to freedom, Harriet Tubman had one piece of advice. If you hear the dogs, keep going. If you see the torches in the woods, keep going. If they're shouting after you, keep going. Don't ever stop. Keep going. If you want to taste the freedom, keep going. And then this was added to someone else, and I'm going to change it a little bit. But even the darkest of moments, ordinary Christians have found the faith to keep going. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. We who believe in love, compassion, and human dignity cannot rest. We who believe that ours is a nation of immigrants cannot rest. We who believe in equality, justice, and care for our planet cannot rest. We who believe in the gospel Keep going. Keep going. Be the salt and the light. The world needs it, and you have the privilege of being it. Amen.